Thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really looking forward to this. Yes, I am from Trinity College, and if I look slightly peculiarly dressed, I'm on my way to the scholars' dinner of that great university this evening, one of the great events of the year. I want to talk to you about GM plants, and in particular about golden rice, and what I want to try to persuade you is that you should welcome the idea of GM plants, and in fact that you should accept that they are made by a truly wonderful technology. Now, GM technology was invented essentially in 1970, and I came back to Ireland in 1970 and began to work on it. And so I've lived with it from the beginning right up until now. It has absolutely revolutionized biology. It's had most extraordinary impact on medicine, on agriculture, on forensic science, and it's changed our knowledge of biology in the most extraordinary way. It's also had huge social impact, and I'll give you a couple of examples. GM insulin was marketed first in 1982, only 12 years after the technology became possible. At the time, there was a growing shortage of insulin. Today, insulin is made by bacteria or yeast, by GM technology. Previous to that, of course, people were treated, by the way, with pig insulin. But pig insulin was running out, and indeed the number of diabetics was increasing greatly. GM rennet, the clotting agent that's used to make cheese, was first sold in 1990. Now, 90% of the cheese produced in the UK and in the United States is made with GM rennet. Previously, it was made with an enzyme from the fourth stomach of the calf called chymosin. But we are running out of chymosin because cheese production was growing worldwide. So what is GM? It's an extraordinarily precise technology, genetic modification, otherwise called genetic engineering. It involves usually the transfer of a single gene from one organism to another. So in the case of the GM insulin, the human gene for insulin was transferred to bacteria, and the bacteria were programmed to make insulin. Plant GM was much more complicated and more difficult, and was invented, in fact, in 1983 by Mark Van Montague and Mary Del Chilton. And so it's been going now for all of these years. That technology was regarded as risky, and it was tested with great stringency worldwide. And it was, broadly speaking, agreed that it didn't carry special risks, but special regulations were introduced. It was effectively a new form of plant breeding. Now, we've been breeding plants knowingly or unknowingly since about 10,000 years ago. And in the last 100 years, approximately, we've been carrying out plant breeding in a scientific way. But this new genetic engineering is much, much more precise than anything we've been able to do in the past. The GM technology for plant breeding spread incredibly fast, so that by 2013, GM plants, crops, are sown in 27 countries, comprising 60% of the world population. 80% of the soy that is produced is GM. 65% of cotton, 30% of maize, and 25% of rape. More than 100 genes have been transferred into literally hundreds of different plants, and there are about 50 different plants, different crops, which are approved in one place or another for commercial production. The most commonly used genes in these projects are genes for insect resistance, genes for virus resistance, and herbicide resistance. There's been huge economic gains for farmers in Brazil, Canada, the United States, and India, for example. 90% of the cotton in India is produced from GM cotton, most of it by small farmers. Now, of course, this technology has been looked at extremely carefully over these years, and there are many reports about the safety and success of this technology. Produced, for example, by the Royal Society, by the US National Academy of Science, by the European Food Safety Authority, by the Indian Academy of Science, by the Third World Academy of Science, and all of these have concluded that, in fact, it is safe and valuable. The WHO, just as an example, in 2005 said this, World Health Organization, GM organisms offer potential of increased agricultural productivity and improved nutritional values, which can contribute directly to enhancing human health and development. For Ireland, just to give one example, I think it's obvious that if we had potatoes which were resistant to blight, that would be valuable. In fact, there are GM potatoes resistant to blight, but they're in effect prohibited from growth in Ireland as they are in the entire European Union. Now to turn to this project, Golden Rice. Some of you may have heard of it. It was invented by two, I think, wonderful European scientists, Igor Patrikas and Peter Bayer. They knew that a very large number of people in the world suffer from vitamin A deficiency. In fact, 2 to 3 million people a year die from vitamin A deficiency. That's more than die from malaria or TB or AIDS. In addition, there's several 100,000 people who go blind. They don't die, but they go blind. And this is caused by the fact that the staple food of these people is deficient in vitamin A. And in the case that Patrikas and Bayer thought about, rice. Rice grains contain very little vitamin A, and I'm talking here about the precursor to vitamin A, but we'll use vitamin A as the term. Their idea was this: to transfer a couple of genes, one from daffodil and one from a bacterium, into rice, and to cause the rice to make vitamin A. Now, I want to tell you this was a really, really complicated project in genetic engineering. But they succeeded. They showed it could be done. Now, the rice that they produced didn't have very high quantities of vitamin A, but nevertheless, they showed that it would work. Proof of principle, if you like. And that led to the establishment of something really wonderful, the Golden Rice Humanitarian Project. It was set up essentially by Bayer and Patrikas with a lot of help from all sorts of people, and funded. They needed a lot of money, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, the Swiss government. Patrikas and Bayer are Swiss, and indeed by many seed companies, companies that you have learned, some of you at any rate, to detest. For example, Monsanto, Bayer, Zeneca, Novartis, Syngenta. In fact, these companies signed over patent rights, but 50 to 100 different patent rights to this project. It was supported by the USAID agency, and also, strangely enough, by the European Community, and also by CGIAR. That's a UN-type body which manages some wonderful research institutes around the world. The objective was to create golden rice varieties suited to the small farmers in developing countries. And this is a quotation: the seed is to be distributed freely to public sector plant breeding institutes who will bulk up the seed in less developed countries. Syngenta has played a very big role in this, and field trials were conducted in the United States in 2004 and in Asia in 2005. And the plan is to distribute the seed through to the seed institutions in the least developed and less developed countries next year. You only need 40 grams of the current varieties that they've engineered to save sight and life a day. 40 grams of rice, it's not very much. Much of the research has been carried out at the famous CGIAR Research Institute, IRI, International Rice Research Institute in Los Baños in the Philippines, and you'll be interested to know that a Cork graduate, Jerry Barry, is playing a very big role in that. Now, I want you to think about yourselves as citizens of Ireland and citizens of the European community. We have had 25 years at least of absolutely inveterate opposition to GM crops. Absolutely rigid opposition to it. And that has emanated, unfortunately I have to say, from a public which has not been well informed, by a media which has not been media in general, not well informed, and of course by political opinion which has been driven by those ill-informed opinions expressed by the public and by the media. I also have to say, frankly, that the opposition has been led by the Green movement generally. And I want you just to understand that this is quite clear. I want to quote, "Greenpeace opposes the release of GM crops, including golden rice." This is having huge international repercussions. It has hampered, actually, the development of golden rice. It has held back the development of other GM crops in the developing countries, and it has held back significantly the development of European agriculture. Our farmers in Europe are denied the use of a valuable, safe technology while they, the farmers, import GM feed for their animals, and why we, all of us, eat GM products in our food. What I hope you might do, if you like, it's a question, a plea to you, really. I hope you will help to change our policy in Europe on this matter, to change our attitude to the regulation of GM crops. And the simple way of saying that is this: the GM crops, which are as safe as non-GM crops, that is absolutely clear, they should be regulated in the same way as non-GM crops. It was Scott Adams who said, "Since when did ignorance become a point of view?" Thank you.